I am based in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and I am leading this global and diverse team with this very unique worldwide level research study to analyze the status and the progress of responsible AI with local evidence. First of all, in the first minutes of this session, I will introduce the project, the Global Index on Responsible AI, for those who are not very aware of it. Then we are going to do a brief introduction of the speakers and the panelists that we are going to be having today. And then we will start with the conversations. I hope you are all seeing my screen. I think that's the case. So let's begin with this brief introduction of the project. So the general objective of the Global Index on Responsible AI is to measure the evolution of commitment and progress on the implementation of responsible AI principles and practice. To answer these questions, do the conditions exist to support and promote the responsible use of AI? What does progress look like? Can we track it over time? And to do so, we had these 4 specific objectives of the project. First, we had to establish a systematized human rights-based benchmark for responsible AI, to then assess country conditions to support and promote responsible AI. And the objective of this task was to provide evidence to decision makers around the world to advance the responsible use of AI and promote digital inclusion. And then in the last stage, to realize responsible AI principles through implementation, evaluation, and accountability. Having set those objectives, we have created this Global Index on Responsible AI, which covers 136 countries and 2 other jurisdictions, where we collected over 500,000 of data points of first-hand evidence to fill critical data gaps to inform global discussions on responsible AI. To do so, we have built a global research network composed by 160 experts. We had the country-level researchers, but also we had a huge team of coordinators, data reviewers, etc. So we have high-quality data to inform global discussions. And with this, we have created this index to identify the key trends at the global level, regional level, and local level to understand how we can improve global AI governance towards responsible AI. And to do so, one of the key tasks, as we mentioned, was to develop the measurement framework. This is how we measure, how we assess responsible AI at the country level. And to do so, we have split the concept of responsible AI into what we call the thematic areas, which are the ones that you can see below, for example, gender equality, data protection, public procurement, proportionality and do not harm, etc. And we have clustered those thematic areas into dimensions. As you can see, in the middle, there is the human rights and AI dimension, which is where we're going to put the focus today. As we say, the Global Index on Responsible AI is mainly framed with a human rights framework. However, in this thematic area, we explore, we analyze, and we see trends in these specific sectors. And for each of the thematic areas, the Global Index on Responsible AI is not only assessing regulation, as many indexes are doing, but we are measuring the complete responsible AI ecosystem. We are, yes, measuring what the government are doing through frameworks, governance, etc. But also we are tracking some proxies of implementation and in protecting and promoting the rights. And also we are tracking the activity of non-state actors. We are seeing how involved are universities, civil society organizations, private sector in responsible AI debates. So this is why we say we cover the complete responsible AI ecosystem at a country level to then have global insights on this. And the output, as we like to say, yes, is the ranking with the scores, with the quantitative distribution of the index. However, we think that the most important output of the project are the findings, the trends, related to topics, related to trends at the regional level, to encourage and to inform in an evidence-based way global discussions on responsible AI. And we would like to spend just a couple of minutes showing the top 10 takeaways of the Global Index on Responsible AI. You can always go to our website. There you can download the report with all the explanation of these findings. Also, you can play around with the data and download all the information as open data. So you can download all the evidence that the researchers around the world have collected to assess countries, and you can rebuild the index according to your research requirements. So to mention just a few of these key findings, we have found that AI governance does not relate into responsible AI. There are many countries with national AI strategies or policies that are not incorporating a lot of the responsible AI key issues. We have also identified that there is a lack of mechanism ensuring the protection of human rights in the context of AI. For example, we have seen that there's limited access to remedy and redress mechanism in the context of AI. The same public procurement and many other key thematic areas with very important mechanisms to protect populations. In the good side, let's say, in the positive findings, we have seen that international cooperation is an important cornerstone in the responsible AI practices. And we have also seen that universities and civil society are playing a crucial role in advancing responsible AI. Many times when governments are not addressing very important topics, universities and civil society are doing so in their countries. And we have seen a lot and very important gaps when it comes to inclusion and equality in AI, which are not being addressed at the country, regional, and global level in thematic areas such as gender equality, linguistic diversity, bias and unfair discrimination. So there are still a long way to go toward responsible AI. So this was a very brief overview of the project. So we are all in the same page when this debate starts, talking about the interconnection between human rights, responsible AI, and the findings of the Global Index on Responsible AI. I will now introduce a brief introduction of the speakers, and then we'll do a brief round of introductions. And then we will begin with the questions and with the panelists. So first, we will have Selam Abdella, who joined the Global Center on AI Governance and is working with the Global Index on Responsible AI. After completing her studies on development at the University of Cambridge, her research analyzed how AI, as well as the policy governance framework related to emerging technologies, affect Africa's socioeconomic development. She's one of the authors of the Human Rights and AI, a Global Index on Responsible AI Analytical report series, which we are introducing to the public today. And in that series, she explores the human rights dimension of the Global Index on Responsible AI and its correlation to the geopolitical landscape, socioeconomic development, and civil liberties to reveal the sociopolitical implications of AI technologies. We will also have David Leslie discussing with us. He is the Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute and a Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at the Queen Mary University of London. His work focuses on AI ethics, governance, and responsible innovation, contributing to significant policy initiatives, including the UK government's AI ethics and safety guidelines. He has held academic positions at Princeton, Harvard, Yale, and Boston University, and serves as an elected member of the Council of Europe Ad hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence. And then we have also Dr. Aileen Carter. She's the provincial head of the Eastern Cape at the South African Human Rights Commission and the National Coordinator for Human Rights and Developing Technologies. With nearly 20 years of experience in legal and strategic leadership roles, she works at the intersection of human rights, digital technologies, and the policy development. Her expertise includes advocating for digital rights, shaping policy frameworks, and navigating regulatory environments. Dr. Carter is committed to promoting equity and inclusion in the digital space and ensuring that technology upholds fundamental rights. So thank you all very much for joining. And we are also having a very important audience of more than 40 people. And then we really encourage you to join this discussion through the chat, through the questions, posts, etc. that we are going to have. So we have a great team to discuss today. So to kick off, in these first minutes, I would like to welcome the panelists and to give them the floor to briefly share your thoughts from this starting question. We would like to start this session asking what is the value added of a human rights frameworks to address AI governance, and also specifically more addressed to Aileen Carter, how does the commemoration of South Africa's Human Rights Day inform the discussion on human rights and AI governance? The fact that we are having this Human Rights and AI webinar today is related with this important date, and also in other parts of the world, as in Argentina, where I'm based, where yesterday was a very important Human Rights Day in the memorial of the victim of the latest dictatorship. So, Selam, please, the mic is yours, and we will to listen to your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Nico. In terms of the human rights framework and the presentation that we're going to have today, first I would want to welcome everyone and really excited to see all the folks who are participating in the chat. The contributions that we're hoping that the human rights framework, the Global Index has, and the Analytical series expands upon is to look at AI beyond AI use and AI adoption, which dominates the conversations, particularly in the Global South, trying to talk about what does it look like when we look beyond whether folks are using or adopting AI, but what people's individual and social experiences with these technologies is. The second one is that we are going to be able to address the experiences of particular communities, especially those who have been historically marginalized, such as women, children, folks with disabilities, and others who face bias and discrimination. And the last one is the human rights framework is not the end-all be-all. It is an invitation to try and expand beyond the thematic areas that are presented in the Global Index. So it provides a good foundation and a good framework to intersect with other approaches, such as decolonial approaches, feminist approaches, that we try to take in these analytical report series, and excited to present it later. Dr. Aileen Carter, over to you.
Afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Okay, awesome. It's such a privilege to be on this platform speaking about something that is super important and evolving, but also staying much the same when we look at it through a human rights foundation-based lens. Now, in terms of reflection and the importance of the lens that South Africa can also bring to this discussion is to really state that South Africa has a strong constitutional and legal framework, but our AI framework is, along with so many other global majority countries, is still lacking. And when we look at human rights, we celebrate in our country this month under the theme of deepening a culture of social justice and human rights. Now, social justice includes elements that we have to incorporate when we speak about AI and AI governance through a human rights-based perspective, and that is redress. That includes reparations, and that includes also accountability. Now, those three words currently is a very hot debate because it's not something that we want to speak about. It's not something necessarily that big tech wants to introduce and put on the table at the outset, because it means we need to do a lot of risk analysis and we need to also prepare for future harm. And it is ours to say that from this vantage point, there can be no discussion about human rights-based foundational approaches without us very clearly and expressly integrating elements of redress, integrating elements of risk assessment, as well as reparations when we speak about accountability. Now, I'm looking forward to having this discussion and also almost illustrating that from South Africa's vantage point, we've always played a leading role in the discourse on human rights because of the atrocities that our country went through. And is it perhaps an opportunity for us then to apply new ways of addressing old problems? Because social justice is going to become a discussion point when we look at what you've already pointed out in terms of the global index, in terms of key findings number 1 and 2. So I'm looking forward to the discussions and also unpacking how we are superimposing the AI phenomena on previous incidences where the Global South was very late in coming to the table when we needed to address potential harms and conversely so human rights violations. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for these initial words, Ellen. Yes, and David Leslie has just let us know that he's a little bit late, so he will join in the next part of the debate. However, this section of the webinar, we are going to focus on Selam's introduction to her report and analysis, and then we can start the panel debate. Please, Selam, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nico. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. I trust you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. The report is already publicly available, but I'm really looking forward to going over our key insights and highlights and recommendations that we had worked on for the analytical report series that we are introducing today. But before we go into the analytical briefs, let's try and highlight why we even built on the global index, going from what Nico had initially introduced. So the human rights-based approach that the global index presents is an opportunity, and it's an invitation to explore more. This is because taking a human rights approach highlights the optimisms about AI, because there are a lot of proponents who speak to how AI presents a lot of potentials for improving humanity as we know it. But on the other side, there are folks who have highlighted that AI could further exacerbate existing inequalities. So when we dig deeper into the human rights perspective, we're able to see both perspectives not as kind of contrasting, but trying to grapple with both of them. And in order to do so, we cannot necessarily only take the outputs of the reports just as they are, but we also need to put them into context. So when we say context, this means the historical contexts and also the social context that we live in. So where we are located, our identities, the historical nuances of where we're based and who we are, inevitably influence our experiences with AI and our community's experiences with AI. So that is why we're trying to use the global index and expand upon it to enrich our insights. So this analytical report series, I want to acknowledge, would not have been possible without the folks who first created and contributed to the Global Index and the contributing authors and collaborators. And although I do have the privilege of presenting our insights today, a lot of people's labor and knowledge and experiences informed it. So I'm very grateful to be able to share what we have found and also acknowledge everyone's kind of contributions to this series. So the Global Index on Responsible AI Analytical Report series uses the index as a foundation, and it tries to analyze different aspects. The first one is regional trends. Next is socioeconomic development. We look at rule of law, and then we dive deeper into two thematic areas that are critical for the Global South. The first one is gender equality, which has been a prominent issue that has been raised about when we're talking about human rights and AI. And the second one is cultural and linguistic diversity. As most of us know, the Global South or global majority countries are not a monolith. There are very many different contexts and realities we should take into account. So we try to dive deeper into these thematic areas for that reason. So when we talk about the regional analyses, this is important because, especially nowadays, technological advancements and geopolitical power or geopolitical dynamics are inextricably linked. And this is because existing powers influence who creates AI, who gets to use it, who has access to it, and who has influence over its policies. And it also influences who will in the future have geopolitical power. So when we are discussing the regional dynamics, we're not necessarily only talking about geographical regions, but the geopolitics that comes with historical ties, as well as the future that we're all envisioning with these technologies. And the AI divide, much like the digital divide, does not exist in a vacuum. It is a condition that is a result of historical inequalities, and it is one that could potentially exacerbate them into the future. So when we are trying to understand the regulatory gaps, we need to take into context where these gaps are occurring to fully understand the potential merits as well as the potential dangers and risks and potential harms that AI can pose. And when discussing about the global north and the global south, it's not to disregard the political and sociocultural weight that these terms carry. But instead of putting them aside, we are choosing to actually acknowledge that global south and global north divides, although they are maybe arbitrary, still exist. But we're trying to go beyond the very definitions of these regions and try to look at inequalities within these regions, showing that global north countries have inequalities within them, and global south countries also have commendable efforts that they are putting into AI governance as well as advocacy efforts. So let's look at some trends here. So this may not necessarily be surprising, but the human rights dimensions scores are much higher in North America and Europe, and they are significantly lower in Africa and Caribbean countries. This disparity is quite concerning because it echoes what colonial legacies, the concerns that are presented by colonial legacies, because the countries that were former European colonies are now not necessarily protected by legal frameworks against artificial intelligence and all the harms and risks that come with it. So the idea that AI can actually solve the different challenges or disparities in these regions is actually challenged by the fact that folks in these countries are not protected from the harms that it poses. So this raises the warnings that folks have brought up about the era of AI colonialism, which we are seeing the manifestations of in outsourcing of labor for content moderation or folks who are in these regions who are also targeted by their own governments or in those regions where AI-enhanced systems can be used to track and arbitrarily arrest folks or misappropriate them to target them for different kind of exploitative systems. But it's also important to acknowledge that there has been progress since the Global Index was published, notably the AU's AI Continental Framework, which besides promoting AI for development, also highlights that human rights is a critical part of addressing inequalities. And there have been also emerging dialogues both at the continental level and at the sub-regional level in Africa that have underscored the importance of human rights and addressing AI-related risks and harms on the continent. So let's look at a couple of thematic areas. The first one is children's rights, which although we're seeing AI permeating different areas of children's lives when it comes to whether it's AI-enhanced targeted ads or the fact that the AI is being introduced in educational settings, there's a significant regulatory gap when it comes to protecting children against AI-related risks. And this is across the board globally. So this is one area that we're seeing a gap in, and it's not only causing inequalities in our current realities, but generationally, this could impact inequalities for future generations. And although there are regions such as Europe, North America, and Middle East that are performing well, the fact that we're not protecting all children equally is quite concerning. And bias and discrimination due to training data and algorithms are also endangering vulnerable populations, especially those who are residing in places that have low regulatory frameworks in the Global South, because they face the double burden of the risks their identities present, but also because they're not being protected through regulatory and governance frameworks. Data protection and privacy is the highest performing thematic area, which is partly because the national security and economic competitiveness have been key incentives for governments to create regulatory frameworks. But when it comes to labor protections and right to work, not every region performs as well. There's actually a report by our colleagues at GCG that dives deeper into this, but there needs to be more attention to adapting regulatory frameworks to address the risks that platform workers, gig economy, and also in recruitment and hiring systems to make sure that workers are being protected. And there have been increased efforts to increase public awareness through AI courses and dialogues that are taking place in the Global South. Cultural and linguistic diversity is something that we address in our reports, not only because the language in which AI is being designed or trained in talks about who can use AI, but also whose realities and whose lived experiences are being included in the systems that we create, because our lived experiences are all different, our cultural priorities may be different, and ensuring that all of us are being represented, included, but also protected when engaging with AI systems is critical to making sure that human rights are being protected. But there are also folks who are using AI to preserve languages and to try and make sure that AI is accessible, such as those who are creating low models for low resource languages in Africa, as well as trying to retain endangered languages in what we know as North America or Turtle Island. There's a gender equality brief, and you can also see the webinar that we had organized earlier this month about it. But gender equality is one of the areas that is least addressed. And this is concerning because we can embed and reinforce existing inequalities into the future, much like many other vulnerable and marginalized communities. And especially when it comes to non-binary or gender non-conforming folks who reside in global South countries, it is concerning that there aren't regulatory frameworks that protect them, and there are significant risks to targeting those folks, and the lack of representation and lack of resources is concerning. And in order to address this, we need to make sure that enforceable frameworks are in place. So for socioeconomic development, what we found is when we look at the World Bank's income categories, as countries' income levels decrease, the human rights dimension score also decreases. So this also indicates that there are varying priorities because lower income countries may be prioritizing the economic merits of AI as opposed to addressing human rights and protection mechanisms. But high income countries have larger disparities, which means that having the monetary resources does not guarantee that countries will actually create frameworks to protect their citizens or folks who inhabit those countries from these risks. And when we expand it to the human development level, similar patterns are seen. So this puts into question whether AI can actually solve the socioeconomic challenges, because unless we protect folks from the harms and risks, the merits that we are curious about or keen to explore could be compromised because of the lack of protection mechanisms. So we need to make sure that the countries that are in lower income categories are being provided with the resources to actually implement these frameworks and to create them as well. And wealthier countries should be encouraged to use the resources available to them to create governance frameworks. We're also seeing that countries that have a history of adhering to the rule of law, and so particularly the ability to enforce it and civic liberties, are performing well with human rights dimensions, which means they're building on the foundational frameworks that they have to expand it to protect AI-related topics. However, countries that don't have a good history of rule of law are not performing as well. So we need to make sure that we are capacitating those that have not necessarily performed as well historically, but also making sure that every country addresses all the complexities and that come with AI-related governance and the rule of law. So when we're trying to measure and analyze the human rights-based approach, we have learned that we can encourage international collaboration not only regionally, but among those countries that perform similarly in similar areas. And global research networks, such as the one that was participating in the Global Index, can actually help capture the nuances and complexities on the ground. And we should always look beyond global South, global North comparisons and look within those blocks for richer insights. The last thing I'll highlight is how are we going to use these analytical briefs? And the first one is hopefully folks can use them for AI benchmarks that can measure different elements of these technologies. And we can also see the trends over time as the technologies and our governance frameworks evolve. And we should also always continue to highlight different efforts from governments and non-state actors and make sure that we are addressing the needs and priorities of marginalized voices. And we have also tried to highlight actionable recommendations for different actors, policymakers, academics, and researchers alike. So we're hoping that these briefs will offer resources and also actionable insights for folks who engage with them. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Salam, for this comprehensive overview of the report series. When we say that one of the key objectives of the Global Index on Responsible AI is to provide evidence for policymakers and to draw paths toward responsible AI, this kind of analysis, including the context, the history, the geopolitics, are fundamental, are key to go along with the global index data. So then there is more space to understand the key actions that we need to take to ensure that AI is used to foster and to protect human rights. So thank you very much for this comprehensive overview. And with this introduction of the analytical series that Selam has presented, I would like to kick off this panel discussion with Dr. Eileen Carter and also David Leslie. Initially with some first reaction to this report series, and to guide a little bit this first step of the debates, we could also ask what lessons from the human rights international institutionality can be brought to the AI governance. This is something that is related with what Eileen was mentioning earlier, of new ways of addressing all problems in some regions. And then we would like to invite you to share your thoughts, following the line on that in Selam's report. It is highlighted that global south countries might face restrictions such as budgetary or capacity when it comes to protecting citizens' rights in the context of AI. So if you want to share some ideas on how can southern countries overcome these challenges, and related to that, what role might have the global and multilateral governance of AI in addressing this particular challenge? So yes, perhaps we could give the floor to Dr. David Leslie, that didn't have the chance to introduce themselves, and then we go with Eileen reflections.
Thanks, Nicholas. It's very good to be here. And Ceylon, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for all those insights. My name is Professor David Leslie. I'm Director of Ethics and Responsible Innovation Research at the Alan Turing Institute, and a Professor of Ethics, Technology and Society at Queen Mary University of London. So this jury work is really important. I think I wanted to share maybe a couple of takeaways that I had from the report that maybe responds to directly to a couple of those questions that you had, Nicholas. First, I was really intrigued to sort of absorb the discussion of how there's this kind of fragmentation in the global AI governance ecosystem that's really being caused or affected by the current kind of geopolitical headwinds. And you know, so we're experiencing right now this shift in sands. We've got the Trump administration coming in a very kind of anti-regulatory, anti-governance perspective, and putting a lot of pressure on different countries to follow suit, right, under the stick. We have the kind of uncertainty of a kind of multipolar geopolitics and geoeconomics, where you've got the US and you've got China, you've got big tech, right, as these different, you know, kind of players in the ecosystem. And one thing I would say that that the report kind of gives me a sense of is that these dynamics of fragmentation must really be met with more robust regional cooperation and collective action, as well as strengthening international human rights regimes for AI on a kind of more multilateral basis, thinking here, for instance, of initiatives by UNESCO and other UN agencies, initiatives, for instance, from the Council of Europe even, that are being now, you know, the Council of Europe has a human rights, democracy, and rule of law impact assessment that they're extending, trying to expand so that it's open to not just the 46 Council of Europe member states, but, you know, more broadly as a resource, more broadly. And I would say the reason why I think that kind of more regional collective approach is needed is because simply we need more collective bargaining power when it comes to setting the terms of the international AI governance environment. We can think here, for instance, about the regional collective bargaining power vis-a-vis negotiating trade agreements that are in the provision of AI services and data that would be more advantageous to countries that have been historically subject to data extraction and predatory behavior. So one can imagine, the negotiation of trade agreements that ensured more transparency and accountability of companies when they're using and trying to kind of go into countries and peddle their products. Another instance would be negotiating international policies, tax policies, right? We know that if you look at the political economy of AI, a lot of the asymmetries and expanding inequality has been caused by extractive behavior, where there's been shifting of tax bases, and the activity of a big tech company or a tech company in say one of the countries in the global souths has been defined by the ability to extract value, but without paying back into the kind of the geoeconomic area that the activity is happening. And so I think it's very important, just looking at that report, to acknowledge that we need a strengthening, regional and international approach to this that addresses not just the kind of governance gaps, but to speak to one of your last questions, that also addresses the resources and capabilities needed to have more symmetry within the global system, right? So I'm involved right now in a UNESCO initiative to write a model framework for AI governance. And part of that model framework is really looking at the ecosystem level changes that need to happen to bring more equity into the global AI environment. And one of the main issues here is, how do we build digital infrastructure? So data infrastructure, compute infrastructure, digital connectivity infrastructure, soft infrastructure like skills infrastructure. How do we build those things in a way that's inclusive of areas which have not been involved so far, right, in the kind of broader technological developmental environments? And one of the main ways we can think of doing that is through regional pooling of resources, regional cooperation to sort of advance those capabilities, and kind of resource pooling that's able to sort of advance that baseline. And one more reaction, if I could. I think I've suggested that there's another kind of dynamic going on that I haven't made explicit, but I would say the other dynamic that, in reading the report, that I think we really need to pay attention to is when we think of North-South disparities, which is really highlighted in the report, we need to focus on the political economy, international political economy of AI, in particular, the way that we are experiencing a consolidation of economic power and a concentration of techno-scientific power among very few big tech, global north-based big tech operators. And I think in order to sort of counter dynamics that promise to perpetuate coloniality and expand kind of global digital divides, that needs to be sort of met with a response that consolidates public interest-oriented political power at regional and international levels, right? Because right now, what we don't yet have are mechanisms to build collective voice that can push back upon power concentration in the global political economy of AI. And I think that we need to really think through policy innovation to create those spaces for that type of action and activity. So I think that, just like, reading the report, I almost, my reaction is, it's great to have this global, index for responsible AI, but that should really inspire us to think big, right, about what is actually needed to transform these larger macro dynamics. And maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, David, for these first reactions. And yes, this thinking big, I think it's a very important output of this kind of discussions. Eileen, would you like to react to Selam's introduction and some of the very interesting points that have been raised recently?
Thank you so much for that presentation, Selam. Yes, I think I can echo what David is saying in terms of these are excellent insights. But unfortunately, for me, it's sad because it reflects kind of what we expect, because this is a superimposition of historical legacies of extractivism, colonialism, and the mere fact that the global south is just not moving at the pace that we needed to move in this political economy of AI. Now, sometimes we need to, when we look through the human rights perspective, ask ourselves whether this is not perhaps designed. Is it by design that we need the global majority and global south to move at a slower pace? Because at the end of the day, if we look at the rollout of products, if we look at the rollout of tech, the nature is, and if you even look at the under the auspices of innovation, the nature is we need to sell these products, these innovations, the technology to these countries during an unregulated phase of R&D. That basically means that when the risk assessment comes to the global north and we roll out, what we can have in terms of prohibitive parameters, that we can still have testing grounds to test it elsewhere. Now, that's not a new approach. That's definitely not new. We've faced that, and I've just had a look for purposes of the South African contribution on at a few innovations, let's say 50 years ago, where let's speak about cigarette advertisements. Cigarette advertisements were banned in the US in 1971. In South Africa, for instance, we only banned it in 1999. So the effects, the human rights abuses, if I can put it like that, and the effects of not having regulated a space where the global north already knows the risks at hand, has to be, we have to ask ourselves, is it from an economic standpoint that this is being done? Is it deliberate? Or is it just, as your report and the index is reflecting, the global south acting too slow? Again, we're trying to apply regulatory responses in an old-fashioned way, but AI doesn't move in that fashion. It's not moving at a pace where we can superimpose old habits onto new examples. Now, how do we address that? Because what the index is basically telling us is that countries from a socioeconomic deficit and countries who have, the socioeconomic rights concerns that are staring them straight into the eyes are coming from almost an innovation point of view. You can even have a look at who is responsible for the development of the regulatory frameworks. It's usually your technology departments, communication departments, departments of innovation. Whereas if you interpret these from a protective point of view, from a human-based foundation point of view, these departments would usually be coming from a justice perspective. Now, we need to also, and that's where I want to also echo what David has said in terms of, the predatory behavior that we need to prevent. And we can't do that if we only act in a manner that we are very much complacent with, and in a manner that we've used previously, because that is not human rights responsive. It is something that we are looking at from a either or perspective, innovation vis-a-vis protection, whereas these are two standalone policy implementation perspectives. We can't have a trade-off in respect of applying these. Now, infrastructure will always be an issue, even in South Africa, which is actually leading a little bit more at the front in this respect. We are still looking at a massive deficit in terms of data, in terms of digital, and we do need investment. But with investment, unfortunately, we do also see that these promises of innovation come sometimes with a policy strong arm. Towards which we are then aligned to follow. And you can see in terms of the countries who are given billions and billions of dollars currently for investments, the innovation will lead to certain policy decisions. Now, if we are behind in terms of regulatory frameworks, which we are, we need to see and look through the lens of human rights and see whether we are using the correct language. Language matters. Language absolutely matters. And if you even look at the AI policies and the strategies, on the continent, the African continent, the use of the word redress is very seldomly, you can't trace it in any of the documents. To even give you an indication, in South African policy framework, which was developed by government, it didn't appear anywhere. We were speaking about ethics. We were speaking about non-binding principles. because it's easy. Self-regulation is the way to go when we speak about big tech. And that is what we are unfortunately have to go into, and perhaps from what David is saying, from a regional cooperation perspective, have to say that no longer can we allow big tech to self-regulate, to come to the table on an ethical perspective, but rather on a binding human rights regulatory perspective, because language matters. If we speak about the moving target of ethics, we're not going to be at the forefront in banning risky practices and banning products such as, let's say, cigarette advertisements, so that we can protect our communities who unfortunately will be at the receiving end of the risks of an unregulated space. So another example, if I can give it to you, is 1968, the US mandated the wearing of seatbelts. It said that it's really necessary for our citizens to wear seatbelts to protect them. South Africa only regulated that in 1996. So are we deliberately, or are we in this comfort zone of a regional lagging behind of the global north? And are we deliberately, because if we know better, we do better, are we deliberately just not keeping up with the pace? Because we are so used to an adopt and adapt perspective that we are not leading this conversation. And that's where I want to pause for now, because as South Africa, we've been leading the conversation in human rights for decades. We're even leading the conversation currently at the ICC. So what I'm saying is the complacency is no longer something that we can accept. AI is moving at a pace that we simply cannot accept, a regulatory pace that we've gotten so used to, even with data regulations. We need to think innovatively, but through a lens of human rights perspective. And I do appreciate that this index gives us the red lights where we need to focus. And perhaps, as David said, we also can find a cooperative mechanism so that we are not the victims of this delayed risk assessment and only recipients of what the Global North has already identified as a risky product.
Okay, thank you very much, Eileen, for these very strong messages that call for action. Do not repeat what has done in the past from the Global South to wait and do things later, and take the leadership, take the voice. And this is one of our key principles in this project and in our organization, to introduce very strongly Global South voices and action paths towards global debates on responsible AI. That we have seen that it's a kind of agreement that international cooperation is really a cornerstone for this near future. Selam, would you like to react to these first thoughts?
Sure. I think I can also reflect on what I was seeing folks were typing in the poll. I think folks were not necessarily surprised by the global North and South divides, but there was an interesting comment that I had seen about how the priorities that we have in the majority world are different from global North countries, and therefore our governance systems should also respond accordingly. And I think in tandem to that, something we could discuss and expand on is whether this idea of governance and innovation can coexist, or whether they are, as presented in most spaces, contradictory. And what I would pose to fellow panelists and the polls, if they would want to respond to this question as well, is perhaps instead of thinking of them as contradictory, we can think of how sustainable and inclusive innovations actually require AI governance. So instead of contradictory, they're actually complementary if we're trying to look for growth and innovation in a manner that includes everyone's voices, and also make sure that everyone's rights are safeguarded and protected. So perhaps we can also speak to how these kind of tensions that we're seeing of the move fast and break things, or if we are going to slow down, quote unquote, we're going to miss opportunities, particularly from the Global South perspective. Nico, I'll delegate to you so that you can give folks chances, but I think that is a perspective that we can expand on.
Yeah, thanks you very much, Selam, for introducing the voice of the audience and also for raising this. That Eileen has been also introducing this tension, if you want to use that word, between innovation and regulation. And also we have seen in both intervention of the panelists, we have seen that the topics of infrastructure and technical capacities come to the table when we talk about AI governance and responsible AI. So these are something that we cannot address in an isolated way. So I would like to give the floor to David, if he wants to jump in, and then to Eileen.
Sure. I mean, I think just a reaction to this idea that global majority voices are clearly positioned to take a different stance than the kind of dominant values that have been driving an unsustainable pathway of move fast, break things. And maybe I'm making that statement because what I really feel is actually global majority countries are really well positioned to manage the transformative effects of these technologies based upon based on alternative values, which is to say, we're familiar with the basket or the kind of collection of neoliberal values that have been driving the AI innovation ecosystem: efficiency, productivity, acceleration, growth, right? These are very familiar concepts, right, in the kind of laissez-faire, economy-focused point of view. And those are of a provenance of just the past few hundred years in a very small part of the world, right? I mean, there's a tendency to naturalize those values, right? But actually those values are a tiny little slice of a much broader human story about values that have to do with flourishing and our coexistence with a global biosphere and interconnectivity of people. And there's a much broader set of values that can inform the way we manage the transformative effects of technology. And maybe I say that global majority is well positioned to do this because actually, the potential to be standards makers, right, and to say no to technology is, as I feel it, greater in areas where those technologies haven't already taken a hegemonic foothold, right? So, in the US or in the UK or, in other places where there is just this kind of almost ideological drive, right, to expand AI based upon those values, based on those neoliberal values. How do you step out of that? There's a real, the hegemonic discourse, the discourse that like locks you into those values is so powerful there. And it becomes really difficult to even have an imagination that envisions practices that move beyond those values. And so that also really quickly, I would say, it seeps into the technology itself. So we'll see this year and next that there's this agentic AI explosion that happens, right? And if you look at agentic AI, what is it? These systems are just built basically on reinforcement learning, which is strategic, goal achievement in environments based upon optimizing a reward function. That is Homo economicus, right? That is the Western value base kind of hardened into technology, if you will. And so I would say we need to really be aware, right, that it isn't a foregone conclusion adoption. AI adoption can be controlled and managed based upon the values of particular localities and how the localities want to build these systems. Data analytics can be very helpful in many ways. It can help us in public health. It can help us in various other, energy management. It can help us in many different ways. It doesn't need to, the way that we handle AI and data science doesn't need to be dominated by a particular basket of values. And so I would say that when we look at it that way, we can start to see that there are opportunities to introduce alternative values into how we steer the direction of travel of the innovation. And that's an opportunity. That's something that we really need to take as a starting point, rather than being reactive to what has come to be this kind of, you know, whirlwind or wave of the move fast, break things attitude that Salam was referring to. So I would say, you know, we need to think differently if we're going to create alternative possibilities for the global future.
Thank you very much, David, for this reflection and bringing these ideas of different basket of values to localize the adoption and the addressing of AI challenges. Eileen, would like to expand a little bit more what you have introduced regarding the tension between innovation and regulation?
No, I think I can only echo what has already been said, but also to say that, you know, we should not only be able from the continent side, especially in the global south, be able to influence this trajectory. We should be leading it. We should absolutely be leading it, because these voices have been very quiet for very long. And what we can see is we've been the breeding ground for abuses, human rights abuses. Every revolution, you would see the effects of that revolution be harshly felt by those who do not have agency in this discourse at the outset. So we need to also think whether there are competing interests here. Is it and that's what so often is being fed to us, that there's this dichotomy between the freedom of expression on the one hand and the innovation on the one hand, that is a more global north principles of application, vis-a-vis the more collective rights from the global south. But these are not mutually exclusive. We have those in the global south as well. And to almost make it an othering situation, that we will get to you when we get to you as the global south, is really, it's what has happened in the development of so many of the new technology. We can only refer back to social media platforms currently, and the regulation, the pushback of regulation, and how the global north has parameters in place. But it's so much more easy to just test the product and roll out the products in the global south, because we're not regulated. So mine would be to say that dichotomy, we can marry that dichotomy. We can say freedom of expression, these principles that are very, the innovation, the rushing towards creating solution-based product. It's great, but at the end of the day, we need to also enable that leading discourse that comes from the global south. Now, how do we do that? Unfortunately, it's also going to have to do with infrastructure development, accessibility. We need to have those conversations, perhaps before we have product rollout, before these products reach the global majority. We have to ask, has there been enough investment in advocacy, in training, in enabling this environment for proper rollout? Otherwise, we're looking at a risk that is going to be forthcoming, that we're not going to be able to regulate. And perhaps, like I've indicated, that is so by design. And we've learned our lessons. And perhaps this time around, the Global South really need to come to the table a little bit more strongly. But in doing so, there has to be public interest and political power, something that can only come with advocacy and as well as digital literacy, if we can put it like that. The decision makers currently, unfortunately, are not the ones at the forefront of technological development. If you look at the parliamentarians who are at the forefront, or should be at the forefront of this policy development, they might be still questioning, you know, what is this ChatGPT, and why is there predictive text on my phone? And those are policy and decision makers. So a lot of advocacy needed, but also investment in advocacy first before rollout.
Thank you very much, Eileen, for these reflections. Salam, would you like to jump in with some comments before we wrap up, since we are running out of time?
Yeah, sure. There's actually two really great questions in the chat. So maybe we can address that and then hand it over to you to close. Okay. The first one is asking about the human rights approach having gaps and recognizing that, and how we are able to, or how we have supplemented that with other alternative or supplementary or even centrally adding social justice, feminist frameworks, etc. So I think this analytical brief series is an attempt at showing folks what they can do with the data that's available with the Global Index. So the Global Index, the first edition at the very least, takes a human rights approach, but offers it as kind of a baseline for folks to work off of. And particularly the gender equality brief and the ones that address bias and discrimination and cultural and linguistic diversity although they don't explicitly state it, take frameworks that are centered in feminist epistemologies or also social justice frameworks. So what we're hoping is to show folks what they can do with the report and expand it further. And the second one is addressing the fact that global South and North relations are not necessarily binaries, and the countries that we are addressing may not necessarily represent the entirety of the global South or global majority countries, which is very true. And I think what this calls for is, as much as we can, inviting more folks to the table, not only in terms of the topics that we address, but the researchers and the expertise that we are engaging in to kind of play with the GRI data or to engage in discourse or conversations about the global index and what it measures and what it doesn't measure need to be diverse in order to include more perspectives. I'll address more in the chat if they're coming in, but Nico, over to you.
Thank you very much, Salam. Well, thank you very much to all of you, David, Eileen, Salam. It's been a great pleasure to having your inputs here, very strong inputs, very innovative reflections, and also thank you very much to the audience. If I had to pick up some takeaways of this conversation, I would like to keep with this idea of the Global South. And not only it needs to have its own voice, but it's in a very good position to lead conversations toward responsible AI, toward AI governance, because of its history, because of the different basket of values that it can bring to the table. So it's in a great position to lead these conversations. And to do so, we don't only have to keep or to focus on the regulations, etc. We should focus on capacities, infrastructure, and also to make this responsible AI effort real, we also need to take into account the political power required to do so, as the panelists have expressed. So thank you very much again, everyone, for joining and for leaving us this very important concept to keep thinking and keep working toward responsible AI.